In July 2015, a man stood in a Connecticut courthouse and told a judge under oath that he was worth $4.4 million. That same man had, 8 years earlier, walked away from a single business deal with $100 million in his pocket. The world looked at this and laughed. The tabloids ran the story for weeks. Late-night hosts made jokes. His fans were confused. His critics said they knew it all along, that the money was always fake, the image was always a lie, the empire was built on smoke. But here's what almost nobody realized at the time. The man wasn't broke. He was executing one of the most calculated financial moves in the history of American celebrity. And when it was over, he walked out of that courtroom 2 years later with his businesses intact, his debts settled ahead of schedule, and a television empire that would eventually be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. To understand what happened in that Connecticut courthouse in 2015, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the bankruptcy, the beginning. Because the thing most people miss about Curtis James Jackson III is that he didn't just understand music. He understood money in a way that almost no entertainer of his generation did. Born in South Jamaica, Queens, in 1975, 50 Cent grew up without the safety nets most of us take for granted. His mother, a drug dealer herself, was murdered when he was just 8 years old. He was raised by his grandparents. By his teenage years, he was selling drugs on the street, not because he was reckless, but because it was the most efficient system he had access to for generating income. He studied it the same way an MBA student studies a balance sheet. That mindset followed him into music. When he finally got his shot, signing to Eminem and Dr. Dre's label in 2002, most artists in his position would have been laser-focused on the music. 50 Cent was laser-focused on the deal. His debut album, Get Rich or Die Tryin', dropped in March of 2003 and sold over 872,000 copies in its first week alone, a record at the time. He was the #1 rapper on the planet, and instead of buying a mansion and a fleet of cars and calling it a day, he started asking a different question than everyone else in his position. How do I convert fame into equity? In 2004, a beverage marketing executive named Rohan Oza saw a Reebok commercial. At the end of the ad, 50 Cent took a swig of a then-obscure sports drink called Vitamin Water. What looked like an accident was actually calculated. 50's manager, the late Chris Lighty, had quietly arranged it. Oza reached out, they set up a meeting, and when Glaceau, the parent company of Vitamin Water, offered 50 Cent a standard celebrity endorsement deal, a flat fee, your face on the bottle, thank you, and goodbye, 50 Cent did something that almost no artist had ever done before. He turned the cash down. He asked, instead, to be paid in equity, a minority stake in the company itself. His reasoning was surgical. A check spends once. Ownership compounds. The Glaceau executives, realizing that 50 Cent's cultural reach could do for Vitamin Water what no advertising budget could, agreed. He received a stake believed to be somewhere between 2 and 10% of the company. He created his own flavor, Formula 50, and he promoted that drink with the same relentless energy he'd used to promote his albums. What happened next was one of the most dramatic brand transformations in beverage history. Vitamin Water's annual sales went from roughly $100 million in 2004 to over $700 million by 2007. 3 years. 7 times the revenue. And in May of 2007, Coca-Cola looked at those numbers, looked at the brand, and wrote a check. $4.1 billion to acquire Glaceau. Curtis Jackson, the kid from South Jamaica, Queens, who had been shot 9 times on the street and dropped by his first record label, walked away with an estimated $100 million after taxes from a single business deal. He didn't rap his way to that money. He thought his way there. But wealth without structure is a slow leak, and over the years that followed, 50 Cent's financial life became increasingly complex, not because he stopped making money, but because the legal and business environment around him turned hostile in a way that even his considerable intelligence struggled to contain. The first major blow came from a lawsuit filed by a woman named Lastonia Leviston, the ex-girlfriend of rapper Rick Ross. Without going into unnecessary detail, 50 Cent had posted a private video involving her online, a decision that, beyond its moral dimensions, turned out to be one of the most financially destructive choices he'd ever make. In 2015, a New York jury ordered him to pay $5 million in damages. And as if that wasn't enough, a separate judge tacked on an additional $2 million in punitive damages, bringing the total liability from that single case to $7 million. Simultaneously, another lawsuit was closing in from a different direction entirely. Years earlier, 50 Cent had invested in a headphone company called Sleek Audio, the kind of move that looked promising on paper. A premium headphone brand, positioned to compete in the same space that Dr. Dre's Beats Electronics was dominating. But the partnership collapsed. An ex-partner accused 50 Cent of stealing the headphone design. The court sided with the partner, and the judge awarded damages of $17.2 million. In a matter of months, Curtis Jackson was staring at over $20 million in legal judgments. In his listed monthly expenses, $5,000 for a gardener, property costs on a 52-room Connecticut mansion that had once belonged to Mike Tyson, child support obligations exceeding $800,000 were bleeding cash at a rate that his income, despite being significant, could not sustain. This is the part of the story that most people know. What they don't know, what the headlines never explained, is what he did next. Because what he did next wasn't panic. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a man cornered with no options. It was a play from a very specific and very powerful legal playbook, and understanding that play is the entire point of this story. On July 13th, 2015, just days before the Leviston verdict was set to be finalized, Curtis Jackson filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the United States Bankruptcy Court for the District of Connecticut. And the world, reading that headline, assumed they understood what it meant. They didn't. There are two main forms of personal bankruptcy in the United States. Most people know Chapter 7, the kind where you hand over your assets, liquidate everything, and get a clean slate. It's the financial equivalent of burning the house down to kill the spiders. You lose almost everything, but you get to walk away free. Chapter 11 is something entirely different. And this distinction is everything. Chapter 11 is called reorganization bankruptcy. It was designed primarily for corporations, large businesses with complex debt structures that needed time and legal protection to restructure without being dismantled. But it's also available to individuals, and the crucial difference is this. Under Chapter 11, you don't give up your assets. You don't hand your business interests to a trustee. You continue managing your own affairs. What you get, in exchange for full financial transparency and a court-approved repayment plan, is something invaluable. You get an automatic stay. The moment that filing was accepted, every single creditor, every lawsuit, every judgment, every collection effort was legally frozen. Lastonia Leviston's legal team, who had been preparing to collect on that $7 million verdict, suddenly had to stop. The Sleek Audio creditors, who were owed $17 million, suddenly had to wait. The bankruptcy court became the single arena where all of 50 Cent's financial disputes would now be resolved under one roof, on one timeline, at negotiated rates. Think about what this meant in practice. Instead of having to simultaneously fight a $7 million sex tape judgment in New York State Court, a $17 million headphone dispute in a separate jurisdiction, and several other creditors all at the same time, all demanding immediate payment, 50 Cent had compressed everything into a single, structured, court-supervised process. His legal team could now negotiate with all of these parties from a position of order rather than chaos. And here is where it gets genuinely remarkable. In the court filings, 50 Cent's financial disclosures revealed something that became the talk of legal circles. His 32 business entities, the production companies, the brand deals, the royalty streams were structured in a way that made many of his most significant assets extraordinarily difficult for creditors to access directly. The vitamin water money, earned nearly a decade earlier, had already been moved, invested, and restructured through entities that were layered in ways his legal team had clearly thought through long before any lawsuit ever materialized. When he testified under oath that he was worth $4.4 million, creditors and their lawyers were floored. Forbes had previously estimated his net worth at up to $155 million. But net worth on paper and liquid assets available to creditors are two entirely different conversations. His wealth was real, but it was held in forms and structures that bankruptcy law treated very specifically. His lawyers described his situation plainly to the court. Legal fees and judgments exceeding $20 million had accumulated in under a year. His monthly income from royalties and business interests was around $185,000. His monthly expenses were around $108,000. That left him cash flow positive on paper, but unable to satisfy immediate lump sum judgment demands without dismantling business interests that were, in many cases, more valuable long-term than any short-term payout. So the court approved a structured repayment plan. The creditors who had been salivating at the idea of collecting millions all at once were now forced to accept payment on a schedule, over time, at reduced negotiated amounts. The $17 million Sleek Audio judgment negotiated down significantly through the process. The $7 million Leviston verdict? Same story. The bankruptcy court had effectively become a settlement negotiating room where 50 Cent's team held considerably more leverage than they would have in any individual lawsuit. And while all of this was happening, while his creditors were frozen, while the repayment plan was being structured, Curtis Jackson went to work. He didn't disappear. He didn't lay low. He launched Power. Power premiered on the Starz network in June of 2014, just over a year before the bankruptcy filing. But it was during the bankruptcy period itself, between 2015 and 2017, that the show exploded into a cultural phenomenon. 50 Cent wasn't just an executive producer in name. He was driving the creative direction, the marketing, the talent relationships, and the expansion strategy for a show that would eventually become the highest-rated original series in Star's history. The bankruptcy hadn't slowed him down. In a very real sense, it had freed him up. With the creditor pressure legally contained, and the lawsuit chaos consolidated under one roof, he could focus on building rather than defending. In 2018, Starz signed 50 Cent to an overall production deal worth a reported $150 million over 4 years. The Power franchise eventually spawned multiple spin-off series: Power Book 2, Ghost; Power Book 3, Raising Kanan; Power Book 4, Force, each one generating new royalties, new licensing deals, new opportunities. He also launched BMF, the story of the Black Mafia family through the same network. The television empire he built from the ashes of his bankruptcy became, by almost any financial measure, more valuable than anything he had owned before it. And in 2017, before his court-approved repayment schedule had even run its course, Curtis Jackson paid off his creditors early. The full amount, nearly $23 million, settled ahead of deadline, funded by his continued royalties, his television income, and a settlement he received in a separate business lawsuit. The man who had walked into that building 2 years earlier, declaring himself worth $4.4 million, walked out having turned the most public financial humiliation of his career into a legal and strategic masterclass. His brand was intact, his businesses were operational, his debts were cleared, and the empire was larger on the other side than it had been going in. Now, what does any of this mean for someone who isn't a multi-platinum recording artist with a team of bankruptcy attorneys and 32 corporate entities? It means more than you might think. The framework 50 Cent used the decision to convert celebrity into equity rather than cash, the choice of Chapter 11 over Chapter 7, the understanding that structured debt is infinitely more manageable than unstructured debt. None of these are celebrity-only strategies. They are principles. They are the same tools used by businesses of every size when facing financial pressure. The first principle is deceptively simple. Equity always beats a paycheck. When Glacio offered cash, 50 Cent turned it down, because he understood, before most people in his world did, that ownership is the only asset that works while you sleep. A check spends once. A percentage of a company compounds for as long as that company grows. The second principle is that financial law is a tool, not a verdict. Bankruptcy, in the popular imagination, means failure. In the financial and legal world, particularly at the Chapter 11 level, it means reorganization. It means pressing pause on chaos, bringing order to complexity, and using the legal system the way it was designed to be used, as a structured mechanism for resolving debt rather than a public execution. The third principle is perhaps the most important, and it's the one that almost never makes the headlines. 50 Cent's ability to survive that bankruptcy was built years earlier in the way he structured his businesses, protected his income streams, and invested his wealth. The walls he built around his assets in the good years were the same walls that protected him when the creditors came knocking. Wealth preservation isn't something you do when things go wrong. It's something you build when everything is going right. Curtis Jackson grew up with nothing. He built something. He lost the appearance of it. And then he used every tool available to him, legal, financial, creative, to build something even larger. That is not a rap story. That is not a celebrity story. That is one of the most instructive financial stories of the last 20 years. And the reason most people missed it is because they were too busy laughing at the headline to read what was actually in the filing. The headline said, 50 Cent goes broke. The filing said something entirely different. Now, if you thought what 50 Cent did with a bankruptcy filing was calculated, wait until you hear what he did during the making of Power that his own network didn't see coming. The behind-the-scenes financial move that turned a television deal into a content empire, and why the people who signed him in 2014 are still shaking their heads about it today.